Welcome to Hashtag Finance. I'm your host, Barrington Miller, and this is Hashtag Finance Weed Week / Cannabis Week. We'll say Volume 1, simply because there's been such an outpouring of support and demand. We're going to extend this, I think, into week 2, possibly week 3. Happy Cinco de Mayo for those choosing to celebrate. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Joe Lusardi, the main person behind Curaleaf. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
So what's going on? What's going on with Curaleaf? I know you guys just released earnings, I think a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, but we'll be doing it again on May 18th. So, the quarters don't give up. So on May 18th, we'll do an earnings call. For us, it's really been a tremendous challenge to shift our business on the fly in the midst of a pandemic. So, things that we didn't historically do, which were curbside pickup, electronic payments, electronic weight rooms, a lot of those things that make the transaction safer for our employees and the customer we've had to implement over the last 8 weeks. And, I'm proud to say that the business is going strong. We're growing in almost every market. The thing that I take the most amount of pleasure in is the fact that we're essential in almost every market in the United States where we operate.
Right.
But for one, Massachusetts adult use. So it's an enormous validation of the industry. Unlike Canada, as you know, we don't have a federally legal program, so we rely on state laws, and it's been an amazing response state by state. It really shows that cannabis is part of the mainstream and an essential product. So I'd say that's probably, a silver lining in a pretty dire situation.
Well, you touched upon having to pivot and having to probably expedite things, which you were most likely going to do later on, or at least explore it. It's now been, you've been forced to do it. And we've seen that a number of people at the CSE have attended virtual conferences, and we're on the phone not only with issuers and service providers, but just people in the industry. And curbside pickup, your distribution channels, your network, the no touching, those things have really ramped up. And the companies like yourself that are able to meet that for the clients. And I have to keep reminding people, this is medicinal. Like, there are people that the quality of life depends on this. And
Right.
we really appreciate you continuing to operate. I want to get back to the state of Massachusetts, because that's been in the news for the non-adult use. How do you feel about that? One avenue is that it was to stop the movement of COVID, because people would be able to cross state lines and such. I don't know. Perhaps you have a little deeper insight into it.
Yeah, I mean, what I would, generally say is that it's an awesome responsibility running a state. I don't envy these governors and the, weighty decisions they have to make between life and death and the economy. So, we're very sensitive to how complicated this can be. And Massachusetts, as you may be aware, was particularly hard hit by the virus. It's the third highest number of cases in the country. So, the governor is under tremendous pressure to keep everybody safe, and he was concerned about cross-border commerce. Massachusetts is the only state on the East Coast with an adult use program, so we were benefiting tremendously from out-of-state commerce and tourism. So the governor put a pause on that part of the program. He did allow medical to be essential. Registrations are up almost 250% in the last 8 weeks. So we've seen a huge surge in demand for medical cannabis. And I'm generally optimistic that we'll get back to work here soon for adult use, probably to residents of the state only for a period of time. But I'm
Okay.
optimistic that we'll get back to work here shortly, simply because I think there's a recognition that even even people that use the adult use channel to buy cannabis, many of those people are buying it for a medicinal outcome like sleep or anxiety or PTSD. We know that we service thousands of veterans that use our shops but can't file for a medical card because they'll lose their veterans benefits from the federal government. So that's a population.
I know that's an issue that's very close to home for you. Like
Incredibly close to home.
I
So that's an issue
yeah.
that we've highlighted, and I think that's resonating with the governor. So I'm generally optimistic. I mean, obviously, we were disappointed with the decision, given this was the only state in the country that took that approach to adult use cannabis. But I think that our point of view is getting across. So I'm hopeful we'll get back to work here soon.
Any estimated time frame,
Yeah,
if you had to hazard a guess?
The governor extended the stay-at-home order till May 18th. They've
Okay.
assembled a working group to advise the governor on which businesses should open after that point and how it should happen. The industry is having a dialogue with that group. So I'm hopeful it will be in May. I can't make any predictions, but I think what we've demonstrated in Massachusetts and everywhere in the country is that we're already operating safely. We're already doing things like social distancing and increased sanitation and curbside pickup. So I think we've demonstrated, even in Massachusetts, we can serve our customers safely. And I think that will help us out in terms of being able to address the adult use consumers.
Now, Curaleaf itself, we have a number of people, interested parties who are watching this, and they want to know what's in store for Curaleaf at the end of this or on the other side. How has this changed? How has Curaleaf changed? And has things just slowed down in the direction you were going to go? Have you pivoted nicely?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's hard to, it's hard to find, positives in such a, difficult situation. But, the reality is some of the things that we're adopting now, including electronic payments and curbside pickup, those are things that should be available to our industry, but they just weren't because of regulations. And so I'm proud to say that we've worked very closely with administrations all around the country to allow those things to happen. And I actually hope they'll be permanent fixtures of our business, even post, COVID. The other thing I'll say is that, the data shows that there's a tremendous increase in the demand for cannabis. So if you look at markets all across the country, we've seen an increase in demand. It's I think to say that in the beginning, where medical cannabis was probably for the most severely ill people, cancer patients, epileptics, etc. Over time, there's a realization that cannabis can be effective for things like anxiety and sleep and PTSD. So I think you're going to see even more people come into the category in light of what's going on. And it's, in these times, for sure, anxiety is up, sleep, a lot of those things that people see can be aided by cannabis. So I think we've seen a big increase in demand for medical cannabis and adult use cannabis. Ironically, I think Curaleaf will come out of this stronger than it went into it. We're growing in almost every market. We're hiring.
Wow, there's not many places that are saying that. So that's
And that's
good.
the crazy thing is that, I don't, to be honest, I think that people are not recognizing that, this is actually a huge, I'd say, watershed moment for cannabis to be deemed essential and part of the mainstream of our society. And, in the end of 2019, we announced a debt deal. We did a $300 million debt raise. That now looks very timely given the markets. So we've got an incredibly strong balance sheet. The company is generating cash in most of its subsidiaries. And Curaleaf was always built on both organic growth and acquisitions. And I think you'll continue to see more of that from us. We really have our foot on the accelerator and intend to continue leading this industry.
So I was fortunate enough to interview Cresco yesterday, Charlie Bachtell.
Yeah.
And both of you have resonated the same thing. And I hope listeners who were tuned in yesterday, keyword balance sheet, strong balance sheet. This is going to be a theme, not only for 2020, but also 2021. companies such as yourself or such as Curaleaf will have the opportunity to raise money, to have sources for financing, and not a lot of places do. And that's a really, really unique position. And, you know, as an investor, and I'm not giving investment advice, this is it's not that kind of show. You know, when you see similar themes and you see the companies that are operating right, then you sort of got to follow them. It's not rocket science. Um, what about expansion? Is it too early to talk about expansion? And I'm sure you're thinking about it later on down the road.
We are always active. Always, we're always looking at the market and trying to find creative deals for our investors. You know, you mentioned Cresco. Charlie is a good friend and a colleague, and I would wholeheartedly agree with what he's saying. I mean, if you look at the Illinois market, I mean, it's just showing explosive growth. The only thing slowing it down is supply constraints, which I think will be addressed this year as people build more capacity. We're operating in supply constrained markets up and down the East Coast. We're adding more capacity every month. And there are a lot of, I think, opportunities to do, bolt-on acquisitions and potentially other, meaningful acquisitions that allow us to expand our presence. We're in 17 states now. We're in basically every state that we want to be in terms of population. As we close grassroots here in the spring, that'll give us access to Illinois and Pennsylvania. So I think we're feeling pretty good about our footprint, but we're always on the move and always trying to figure out ways to add value for our shareholders and all the stakeholders of Curaleaf.
I want to backtrack a little bit. You were talking about some of the things that people were using the cannabis for. Have you seen a spike in people using it for sleeping or sleeping disorders or anxiety, just based on what's going on in the world around us? Has anything changed? Has it remained pretty steady? Have you seen something spike out that you wouldn't have really expected?
No, honestly, it's only anecdotal, but even before the this pandemic, we've been saying for a long time that we think about 2/3 of the people that use adult use cannabis even buy it for something like sleep or anxiety or PTSD. So, I personally believe sleep is probably the number one indication why people use cannabis. And there's more and more recognition all the time that cannabis is a viable alternative to Ambien or NyQuil or a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
And it's natural. So I think it's too early to say if there's any specific trends, but if you look at the data that's published by states, I mean, the demand is clearly up across the country in every market. So I think, that would suggest that more people are turning to the category for relief.
How do you feel about discussing some politics? Some
My
US
favorite
politics.
topic.
Let's go to the election. And what do you see? What does it matter who gets in as far as moving this forward on the legalization front? Or do we even care about legalization at this point? Do we just want banking? Because from everybody I've talked to, banking is far and away more important than legalization as far as the impact and the reach and scope that it can have. I'm in Canada. I only know what I read in the news and what I try to watch on the news and read on Twitter and all of those things. But what's it looking like? And do you have a favorite? Is there somebody you would prefer?
Well, I'll try to unpack that, question. The first thing I would say is that, in terms of what's on my, Christmas list, if I had one, banking certainly would be number one. I think, banking will reduce the cost of capital. It will likely give us access to more investors, and that obviously would increase the liquidity in our stock. So I think those will all be very good things and allow us to raise a cheaper capital and continue to build our business. The next thing on my list would be 280E. There's a broad recognition that the cannabis industry is being taxed unfairly. The IRS is applying an arcane section of the tax code to penalize our industry, and that needs to be resolved. And we're all working very heavily as an industry to get that resolved. In terms of full legalization, I think it's unlikely, but I would love to see the States Act. So the States Act, for people that don't know, is really a federalist approach. It's an acknowledgement that states can make their own cannabis policies without interference from the federal government. Everybody thinks that would be a really great, sort of approach to how to move this forward. I would suggest that the country may not be ready for full legalization. There are still
Okay.
many conservative states that, look, I always tell people, there's still 17 states without medical cannabis. So I think,
Right.
each state needs to come to its own policy in its own time. So I'm not sure that a full federal rescheduling is appropriate or is in the agenda, but I do think that this is no longer a partisan issue. I believe that it transcends politics. There are red states and blue states that now have cannabis. Utah is coming online this year. Oklahoma came online. So you're not talking about just the liberal elites anymore. These are, middle of America states that have medical cannabis programs, and a lot of people are getting huge benefits. So it's not partisan. But I do think that the next election cycle could have a huge bearing on, what happens for cannabis reform. It's very clear that, particularly in the House, the Democrats are taking a leadership role in
Yep.
cannabis reform. They've passed, the safe banking bill. They're going to pass a bunch of other bills out of the Congress, I'm confident. So the real question is, can it get through the Senate? And it seems right now that a Republican-controlled Senate is not friendly to cannabis. And so we'll have to see what happens in the next election.
Just gotta
Certainly
word
the president, President Trump has said he will sign the States Act if it gets to his desk. I suspect that, Joe Biden, as the nominee, will also be pro-States Act. So I think it really is going to come down to who's in the Senate.
Almost sounds like it's Joe for president. If anybody's watching.
No, I'm not saying that. I don't think it's
Yeah.
partisan, frankly. I really don't. I think that both President Trump or President Biden, if that happens, would probably sign the States Act. It really comes down to what happens in the Senate.
Well, that's brilliant insight, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to just jump topics here. When I was speaking with Charlie, he had a very, very strong beard game. His he looked like Grizzly Adams, and
Yeah,
I mean it was perfect and big.
yeah,
You've decided to keep clean shaven, and it's good.
yeah. My wife would not approve of that type of look. I think I'd be sleeping in the basement if I was rocking a beard. In fact, she gave me a haircut this weekend, so this is.
Well, I haven't. Oh, we're on a
Sorry,
little
you got
bit
me
of
back?
yeah, we
Yeah, I
got
was
you
gonna
back.
say, so in fact, she gave me a haircut this weekend, so it's clean shaven in my house.
No, this is the most hair I've had since the 90s, so I'm my kids have never seen me with hair, so it's sort of an ongoing joke.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think you got it. It looks good, but the problem as you get older too is the beard. The gray is a little revealing of
yeah,
let's say your
yeah.
your time on the expiration clock. So I like to keep the grays away.
I want to go back to the veterans, and I know that you're in contact and you're in touch with them. How are they doing? What's the feel? There's a very, very strong not only voting demographic and retail demographic, but they're there, and the United States has a very, very mixed history with how they've treated the vets,
We agree.
and
We agree.
and I know that Curaleaf is behind them. How are they doing?
They're not doing well at all. I mean, I think it's 3 to 5 veterans commit suicide every day. There are 20 million veterans that don't have access to legal cannabis, but they can have a mouthful of opioids prescribed by the VA. Many of the veterans are addicted to opioids. When they can't access legal cannabis, they have two choices: go to the black market or return back to opioids. When the adult use shops got shut down in Massachusetts, the veterans were very vocal in their displeasure with that decision. And
As
we're
they
not going
should
to
be.
give up this fight. We're going to stand behind our veterans and make sure that they have access to this product because it saves their lives. And so that's a big issue for Curaleaf. I would say the U.S. has had a very poor history with treating our veterans. In fact, it's interesting, even in Massachusetts, there's a soldier's home that has been hit very hard by the coronavirus. I think almost 70 veterans have died in that home due to lack of staffing and lack of protocols. So, it's just a continuation of our veterans being treated very poorly in this country.
That's you know what, I want it to change, and I hope it changes. And um, thank you for caring and trying to make that difference
Yeah, it's
for
going to be
people that
something
have
we're going
fought
to keep
for it.
advocating for. It's something that's very personal to all of us, and it's something that we're not going to give up the fight until we get what we need.
COVID-19 has changed and modified a lot of leadership styles and qualities. Uh, you know, you're the head. You're the head of Curaleaf. How has this changed, or has it changed you at all? And if so, how? Um, what's different about you and your style now than it was 8 or 9 weeks ago?
Yeah, I think what you realize is whether you're an effective communicator or not, it's very hard to keep the business going when you're, working out of your house and you can't be face to face and have interpersonal conversation. So you got to try to figure out ways to be an effective communicator and move things along. Obviously, I'm just the head of the business. I've got an incredible team of people around me and all through the organization that are really doing, the work. And I couldn't be, prouder of our senior team and frankly, everybody out in the front lines. All of our employees interact with customers every day, and our growers and processors, everybody that keeps the engine going. So for me, it's more about feeling proud of the organization that we've built and the people around me that have been able to execute. And so that's something that I think, as we reflect upon the last couple of months, we're very proud of. And what we always tell people is that, right now we're approaching probably close to 25% unemployment in the U.S. So the best thing we can do for our stakeholders, our employees, is to keep this going and keep serving our customers. And so we're all dedicated to doing that and staying on our mission. And that's really what Curaleaf is about.
Well, we definitely appreciate it. We appreciate at the Canadian Securities Exchange. We appreciate your listing. Um, I still remember. I still remember one of the first times I think you came in and we met, and we were joking about Molson Canadian, um, and I promised you that I'd give you a six pack if you listed, and sure enough you did, and I gave you a six pack, and
You sure
that
did.
was one of the more unusual unusual welcome gifts.
Yeah.
I got a lot of questions because I forgot to tell people, and they're like, "What are you doing with this six pack?" And I'm like, "Joe's coming in. I promised."
Well, I can
So,
tell you, I appreciated it. It was actually a hard day too, so I actually cracked one of those things open, and it was well appreciated.
no, no, it's and anything that we can do to help not only spread your message, but to showcase and highlight Curaleaf. You've been a star on the exchange, and we really, really appreciate everything that you're doing. Just as we're winding down, because I know you got a big MSO to run. Is there any other messages you'd like to tell our audience, or anything you'd like to share going forward?
No, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share our story and highlight Curaleaf. You guys have been a tremendous partner. So thank you for everything you're doing. Hopefully we can meet again soon and drink a beer and without social distancing. So good luck to you and your family, and stay safe.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. And for those of you who are wondering, you can submit questions to myself. You can submit it directly to to Curaleaf. We're at the www.thecse.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube under CSE_TV, as well #finance. We're available on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Apple Play, Buzzsprout, Spotify. So there's lots of ways for people to get this, and this will be posted on Instagram for the next 24 hours. So on behalf of the Canadian Securities Exchange, I'm your host, Barrington Miller, and we've been speaking with Joe Lusardi from Curaleaf. Thank you very much.